Hello, my name's Mark Johnson. I'm from the Institute for Educational Cybernetics at the University of Bolton, and myself and David Sherlock would like to talk about some software that we've developed as part of a SPLICE project. The software is called TrackMe, and its role in the SPLICE project has been to try and focus on the online habits of learners and teachers, and to try and give people a way of reflecting on those habits and possibly changing them. So what I'd like to talk about is the challenges that we faced in terms of getting people to use this software, and also David is going to talk about the functionality that the software itself has. First of all, to give a bit of background to the project, SPLICE is a project which is focused on learner habit. We make the assertion that the issues that learners have with technology are not necessarily to do with the affordances of technology itself, but rather the habits that people have. And the challenge that we have in learning technology is getting teachers and learners to change their habits. Now this takes us into different sort of academic territory. So instead of looking at the affordances of technology, we're looking at sociological work on habit. And the key player in this field really, I suppose the starting point is Pierre Bourdieu, and Bourdieu's idea of habitus. Now for Bourdieu, habitus, or the tacit embodied knowledge that people carry about with them, was a principal mechanism whereby social structures were reproduced. And this takes us to the sort of academic debate of the relationship between structure and agency. And here in the paper I talk about this relationship between structure and agency as it's represented by the critical realist school. So this is the work of Margaret Archer and Roy Basker particularly. So we see a relationship, a cyclical relationship between individual human agency and social structure, where agency reproduces and transforms social structure, and social structure conditions agency. Now if we're to consider human agency, it's reasonable to consider technological human agency, and to consider its relationship to social structure, and particularly to consider the importance of online social structure as a conditioning and transforming mechanism. So here I've got a similar diagram of the relationship between personal technological organisation or personal technological habit and personal social capital as represented by online social structures. And so you can argue that similarly technological organisation reproduces and transforms an online set of connections, and those sets of connections create a need for increased engagement with online structures. In a sense, these mechanisms are all part of the rationale behind the SPLICE project, and they're also part of the rationale behind TrackMe, because TrackMe makes this relationship between habit and social capital real. So at this point I'd like to hand over to David Sherlock to explain the functionality of the TrackMe software.
The learner starts by building a library of resources. They begin with simply recording, categorizing, and managing the web history and resources they use while performing certain activities. Twitter integration helps the user to easily create microblogs about the resources they use. Learners can then search through these blogs to see the similar engagements others are having. Here we see a user searching for a resource they have used and found particularly effective. The results displayed are from a global audience of learners and are a great way to promote self-reflection and discussion. The extension offers a visual representation of learners' engagement and activity on the web. Here we see a touch graph map of a learner's different online activities and the connections that can be made between these. From this, the learner is able to see and articulate where their learning habits have benefited from transparency. For effective reflection and collaboration, learners need the ability to articulate the habits they have. TrackMe encourages this through a feature set that allows analysis of user profiles and to compare their profile with others. Here we see analysis of resources used by a learner. Users are able to see which tasks they spend the most time on and the resources that help them to accomplish these tasks. Learners can then relay this information to other learners, to a tutor, or simply use this information for self-reflection.
Now, having said all this, and having produced a tool which is quite interesting, as I've explained in the paper, actually getting people to use this has been really quite difficult. And the reasons behind that difficulty have been perhaps interesting to reflect on, and really that's the content of what we're talking about in this paper. Really, when people experience technological difficulties, we've found that the difficulties aren't really technological. They're very often to do with deeper personal things. And actually, those personal things extend to difficulties in looking at their own particular personal habits. And so a sort of reluctance to use TrackMe has sort of been a reluctance to actually look at your personal sort of online habits, and this is interesting because, in a sense, although it means that the tool that we produced hasn't necessarily had the take-up that we might have wished, the fact that it hasn't had the take-up sort of reflects this fundamental importance of habit in the way that people engage with technology. However, it's not all doom and gloom, because one of the things that we have had success with is actually using TrackMe to talk about some of these mechanisms which would otherwise be very difficult to articulate. The fact that we've got TrackMe means that we can talk about this relationship, this very deep relationship between individual human action, and particularly action with technology, and a rise in connectedness, social capital, etc., and actually give people a chance to experience it. In our conclusion, we suggest that this relationship between the tools that we make in e-learning and the discussions that evolve as a result of using those tools is not a trivial matter, and it's something that Niklas Luhmann, for example, in his theory on art, has talked about at great length, and I think there's considerable more scope for inquiry here. With that in mind, we'd be particularly interested to hear about what you think about the relationship between technology and the conversations about technology which emerge from using it. Thank you very much.